So right now we're in super crunch time. It's the last week of the semester before finals, and so much is piling up. I know you guys feel exhausted because I just feel like I've dropped the ball in more areas than one. And at the beginning of the semester in January, I made a New Year's resolution that I was going to work out twice a week, and that has been the only thing that I just have not dropped the ball on. Like, I'm consistently going to my workout classes twice a week. And a couple weeks ago, I do kickboxing. So a couple weeks ago, I went there, and it was kind of unusual because we had a really big workout class. And normally there's only about 12 to 14 people. And when I went there, I normally go with Vivian and Lori. I don't know if you guys know them, but Vivian's normally my partner. And she's about the same, height, same size as I am. We duke it out together, and it's a lot of fun. But this time, because it was such a large crowd, they're asking us all to kind of pick someone who is new so we can bring them along with us. And so everyone right away picks out partners while I'm getting water. And I look, and the only girl who's left is she's like 5 or 6 inches taller than I am. She's much larger than I am. And she had the audacity to wear a Florida Southern shirt. And I'm wearing my Southeastern shirt. So we just looked very different. She was like the Incredible Hulk, and I was like, little bitty girl. And it was even funny that I still had glitter on my eyelids from school that day, and I had hot pink shoelaces, and she had the shaved side of her head, lip ring. She just looked like she could beat me up. So right from the get-go, I'm like, I'm gonna do it, this is it, I'm gonna die. And so we just start going at it, and she's the first person to punch. We're all geared up, it's not gonna hurt us that bad. So she just starts punching me, and she was as powerful as she looked. So I'm just I kept backing up. I was like, I'm not gonna die today. I just kept on backing up. And when I went back it was my turn to go punch her, and I was sitting here thinking, what am I doing? Number one, I am a pacifist. Why am I even doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Number two, my favorite color is glitter. I really don't want to get beat up right now. I'm very girly. So my thoughts on that were that, Kath, get outside of yourself for a second and realize you're better than this. You're she's from Florida Southern, you're from Southeastern, you're better than this. So it's kind of prepping myself up. So I decided to go ahead and punch her as hard as I could. And so I did, and I just punched her really hard. And at that moment, I guess it caught her by surprise, but I knocked her back into the wall. And I was so excited, 2 things happened right there. I was like, yes, I just knocked this chick into the wall. And the second thought was, did my friends see this? So I looked over at Vivian and Lori, and instead of seeing that I knocked this chick into the wall, they're over there with their mitts and their, what do you want to call them, boxing mitts, boxing gloves, and they're taking, selfies to post on Instagram with each other, just posing. And I was like, are you kidding me? Just highlight of my life. And they didn't even see it. And so it dawns on me, hey, I just knocked her into the wall, let me make sure she's okay, third thought going on. So I go over to kind of help her up a little, and she wasn't even having it. She just came up and she just punched me as hard as she could. I was out, just went flat to the floor, and I totally deserved it. So just kind of let that story sink in, that there's a lot of, opposition going on here. But as we just kind of reflect on what just happened, I kind of want to recap what the series we've been going through so you can kind of see where I'm going. So last week, Dr. Ehler talked about turning around before we get stuck. And he kind of put a scenario of you're going in a car ride, you're going to the fast range, you're about to get stuck. So stop before you actually do and make the right choices. And then after that, Christian talked about comparing one another and how that's kind of not the best scenario. And Jonathan had a real hard one. He talked about the struggle of suffering and what we can do through that and how God's actually in that. And today I want to talk about turn around from selfie mode. And from there, so we have the general structure of where I'm going at. And they also, in those main points, they also highlighted points from Philippians as the letter. And they got through a whole lot of good points, but there's some I want to add to that really speaks to mine. And first off, the tone of this letter that Paul writes is very joyful, it's very friendly, it's very affectionate, not much like, do that in the boxing. It's very joyful, it's like a pep talk. And if it was written today, Paul would have put like a little smiley face emoji, maybe the thumbs up, like it would have been a good one. And it wasn't scolding whatsoever. It was like, hey, attaboy, get up and you're doing great. And it wasn't, wasn't a hard one. The second thing I want to point out about this is that Philippians is actually written as a chiastic structure. And if you don't know what that is, it's sort of a form of poetry where the first thing, like if I were to say that I woke up and got out of bed, got dressed, ate, got dressed in my pajamas, and then got back in bed, it's kind of like it starts from one point and goes back, kind of like reverses itself. And the main point is the middle, like my main point that day was I ate. So we can kind of often see it as like A, B, C, C prime, B prime, A prime. And my chapter, which is Philippians 2, runs right here. So Philippians 2, it's in the middle. So what it's saying is that, not to brag or anything, but I got the most important, like the central message of what Paul was saying. And so did my friend Michael, who goes after me. So when Paul is saying that in this message, he's saying that what Christian and what Jonathan went over, and what Dr. Ehler went over, is that it's leading up to this main message, and what goes after this is kind of digressing from that. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it to you so you kind of see what I'm talking about, like what the main meaning of it is. So it's Philippians 2, verses 1 through 16. I will be reading from the Message, and if you don't like the Message version, I used to be one of those like Message haters. But like after going through like doing the prayer practice of the Lectio Divina, where you kind of read it over and you meditate on what it's saying, I really began to love the Message version just really recently, because it kind of hits at the main point without getting to all the logistics of it. So I'm just going to reread it, or read it for the first time, and you're going to kind of reflect as I talk. So Philippians 2 verses 1 through 16 says, "If you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of faith, community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front, don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourself long enough to lend a helping hand. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think much of himself, that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredible, humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life, and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything, ever, so that all created things in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow and worship before this Jesus Christ, and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honor of God the Father. What I'm getting at, friends, is that you should simply keep on doing what you've done from the beginning. When I was living among you, you lived in responsive obedience. Now I'm separated from you, keep it up. Better yet, redouble your efforts. Be energetic in your life of salvation, reverent and sensitive before God. That energy is God's energy, an energy deep within you. God himself willing and working out what will give him the most pleasure. Do everything readily and cheerfully, no bickering, no second-guessing allowed. Go out into the world uncorrupted, a breath of fresh air in a squalid and polluted society. Provide people with a glimpse of good living and of the living God. carry the light-giving message into the night, so I'll have good cause to be proud of you on the day Christ returns. You'll be living proof that I didn't go at this work for nothing. So just hearing it, you kind of see that it's a huge pep talk. It's very positive. It's very much, the smiley face, thumbs up kind of thing. And in this moment, he's asking them, we saw from the first 4 verses, he's saying, hey, when he says, if you care, if you love God at all, he's asking you to agree with each other, to love each other, be deep-spirited friends. So in that, he's literally saying, get away from selfie mode. Like, guys, you've been doing such a great job. I'm really proud of you, and you do. And when he's saying that if you've gotten anything at all from that, it's not a real question. He's saying, I know you've gotten a lot from this walk with God. I know you've gotten a lot from being a part of the church. And if you haven't become a part of the church, he's saying that you really need to kind of refocus on what's going on, that these are not the other. He's saying that you really must kind of refocus from looking at yourself and look at the other person. And the reality is that they had something to be proud of, that these people are, this is the church in Philippi, these people are doing great. These people are, they're not these kind of lost Gentiles, or there are Gentiles who came to the faith. There are people who came to this saving grace of God. And so he's saying that you guys have cause that made me proud, but keep it up. And from there, I just want to mention that he mentions how in the first 4 verses that you've had this great cause about you. You've understood the biblical message. You've understood the gospel. You've understood that what being a community of faith is to be spirit among you. And he's saying, but agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. And here, we all had to do a word study. So mine was on other. And this other, at first I thought, someone else in the church. Agree with the other person sitting right next to you. Because that just kind of makes sense. He's kind of talking to, the church people. But when I looked it up, other actually meant someone of a different kind, or someone who's literally in opposition to you. So it's almost referring to your enemy of thought. So it's to say that these people, and it's still not very clear, it might have been a person who was in the church who had a deep kind of disagreement with them on an issue. It could have been referring to that, or it could have been referring to an unbeliever altogether. So what he's saying that right now, if you're in the room, you have an other, you have enemies, you have not necessarily people you hate, but people who you don't necessarily agree with. You could be a Christian and not agree with the person right next to you, and you don't even have to be a Christian to have opposition with anyone. So, but he's saying right now that he's literally speaking to, it's not just the easy thing okay, agree with your best friend. He's saying, agree with your enemies. Be deep-spirited friends with those who go against you. And that's kind of a huge, wow, bite my knuckles type thing. And, but why is he saying that? We see that, that he was kind of, I really felt convicted almost about how, just because this girl, she looked very different than I did, going back from the first story, how she had the shaved head, she had the, lip ring, she was very, buff, and she had the 4-7 shirt. So I just really pinned her as someone who I had to go against, because I'm just naturally competitive, and I felt like she was the other, and she was the person I was supposed to go against. And I know that's kind of a silly story, but in the real walks of life, when we go out day to day, we kind of pick people who we naturally just go against, this is a race against them. And we don't realize that in the very first couple verses, he's saying that if you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, and let's say you're not a Christ follower, if you care at all, if you have a heart, all of us have hearts. He's speaking to every being on this planet. So he's lumping us all together. He's saying that in that, everyone, please do this. Care for each other and be in like-mindedness. And to say that is to say that it's not just people who are friends that we're on the same team with. He's saying that we're all on the same team. that we are not each other's enemies, and that we've kind of messed that up. We've kind of considered other people as the other. And he's saying, no, like that's not true. He's saying that we're all on one team. We're all working toward this one goal. And from there, I know what you're thinking. That's kind of exhausting. That means that I have to be friends with everyone. I have to be deep-spirited friends and always be kind of thinking of others who think very differently than I do. And that sounds a little exhausting. And the reality is, it is hard to be the bigger person all the time. It is hard to always like, okay, can't leave my cool, can't knock someone out right now. I have to kind of remember that we're on the same team. But it's not like God's just asking us to do that. The reality is that Jesus one-upped us, that Jesus, he really gave himself up. He was God and took that aside and became equally human and took on this terrible death, a crucifixion, and lived this terrible life, of just intense suffering and intense kind of just every bit of the life that we would live. And Jesus went before us, and Jesus did that. And if God can do that, like if Jesus became man and can do that, he's saying you can do it too. So it's almost like we have no excuse in this. And that's coming from Philippians 2, 5 through 8, about how Christ really did one-up us. And from there, it goes on to say in verses 8 through 11, that Jesus got rewarded for this. And that he's saying that in 9 through 11, because of that obedience, God lifted him high, and honored him far beyond anyone or anything, ever. So that all created things in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow and worship before this Jesus Christ, and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honor of God the Father. And this is verses 5 through 8 and then 9 through 11. Lumping those together, this is the quintessential of Philippians. It's almost like it got the most likes on Instagram from the Pope or something. Like that's how important this is right now, that this is just this huge structure from ancient times. So we should view that as right now, that this is kind of super important. And just for kind of further clarification, we see that Jesus came on this earth, humbled himself, put everyone else aside, even though Jesus was blameless. And then he gets rewarded for this. And to clarify that, this doesn't mean that we can never take selfies. It doesn't mean that we can never kind of focus on ourselves. It means that that sometimes it's okay to look at other people. It means that don't focus on yourself at the expense of others. Definitely take that, swap that camera mode onto someone else. And definitely focus on other people. And Jesus did it to the utmost regards. God's not even calling us to die on a cross. God's not even asking us to do that. He's asking us to just be deep-spirited friends, something that's cool and fun to do, And kind of take that into consideration as we walk throughout our lives. And I know this is all sort of kind of theoretical as we've been talking. I kind of want to give almost a real practical sense that we can do this. Something that helped me was keeping a prayer journal, because I am not one to pray for other people very often. Like I think, oh my God, like this is a rough day, help me God, I need you throughout this day. Assignments are piling up, maybe my friends are struggling and taking it out on me. So I'm always praying for myself. And I realized that I wasn't really considering others, and I wanted to change that. So I decided, in addition to, we do our devotionals, we pray, we read the Bible, I wanted to write down in a booklet every single night someone that touched my heart that day that I wanted to pray for and consider for that person. And so like on Tuesday night, I prayed for, Jonathan shared this really hard, struggle, and just kind of praying for him that God, he's struggling right now. And that was hard to listen to because, we felt for him. All of us in this room did. And we came up, we prayed for him. And it just made me realize that we're all kind of just getting by. And some of us are, having better days. Some of us are having rougher days. But we're all focused on ourselves. And if we would just kind of focus on one another, that it makes us realize that we're not in this alone. Everyone's right alongside us struggling, and also that other people are considering us too. So